The scanner found royal DNA in a homeless human. The throne had been empty 1,000 years. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. On the frozen streets of New Galatia, the jewel city of the Centauri Empire, a man in tattered clothes huddled against a heating vent, invisible to the thousands of alien citizens rushing past. His name was Nathan Brooks, and he had no idea that within the next hour his DNA would shatter 1,000 years of galactic history. The Centauri Empire stretched across 47 star systems, a civilization so ancient that most species considered them the first children of the stars. Their crystal spires reached into the clouds. Their technology bordered on magic, and their society operated with clockwork precision. Every street in New Galatia gleamed with polish. Every building hummed with perfectly calibrated environmental systems. Every citizen moved through their day with the confidence of a people who had mastered the cosmos. But there was one thing the Centauri lacked, one empty space at the heart of their perfect empire. For 1,000 years, the eternal throne had sat vacant, waiting for the return of the lost dynasty. Nathan pulled his coat tighter, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The coat had once been expensive, a gift from his supervisor, back when he still had a job, back when he thought his future in the stars would bright and full of opportunity. Now it was threadbare and stained, the smart fabric that once regulated temperature failing in patches. He had arrived on New Galatia 6 months ago on a transport freighter, working as a maintenance tech for a small shipping company that promised good pay and steady employment. The company went bankrupt 3 weeks after his arrival, stranding him on a world where everything cost 10 times what he could afford, without enough credits for passage home to Earth, without connections or resources. He had joined the invisible underclass of the Empire's capital, the forgotten people who lived in the shadows of all that shining glory. The irony was not lost on Nathan. He had come to the stars seeking adventure, seeking to be part of something bigger than himself. Instead, he had discovered that poverty looked much the same whether you were on Earth or on an alien world light years from home. The same desperate search for food, the same cold nights, the same way people looked through you as if you did not exist. A patrol of Centauri peacekeepers marched down the boulevard, their scanner arrays sweeping the crowd. The peacekeepers were an impressive sight, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that ranged from bronze to silver to deep copper. They wore armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal, and they moved with a grace that made Nathan think of dancers despite their obvious martial training. It was routine, something they did every day, checking for contraband, weapons, illegal substances, anything that might disrupt the perfect order of New Galatia. Nathan had been scanned dozens of times before. He knew the drill. The blue light would wash over him, the device would beep once to signal completion, and they would move on without a second glance. But this time was different. The lead peacekeeper, a tall Centauri named Valoran with skin that shimmered like polished copper, swept his scanner over Nathan's huddled form. The device's hum suddenly became a shriek, a sound so loud and unexpected that people 50 m away turned to look. Every scanner in the patrol squad activated. simultaneously bathing Nathan in overlapping fields of light. The scanners were practically screaming now, their alerts harmonizing into a discordant symphony of urgent beeping. Valoran stumbled backward, his eyes widening until the golden irises seemed to fill his entire face. His hand went to his weapon, then froze, then moved to his chest in a gesture Nathan had never seen before. Nathan raised his hands, instinctively thinking he was about to be arrested for some unknown violation, some law he had broken without knowing it existed, but Valoran wasn't reaching for restraints. He was dropping to one knee, his head bowed, one hand pressed to his chest in a gesture that looked almost like prayer. "What are you doing?" Nathan asked, confused and frightened. His voice came out as a croak. He had not spoken much in recent days, had almost forgotten what his own voice sounded like. "Get up, please. I haven't done anything wrong." Valoran's voice shook when he spoke, and Nathan realized with shock that the peacekeeper was terrified not of Nathan but of what the scanner was telling him. "Forgive me, Highness, I did not recognize you. None of you as did. How could we have known, Highness?" Nathan looked around wildly, thinking the peacekeeper must be addressing someone else, some important Centauri dignitary who happened to be walking past, but there was no one near him. The other pedestrians had backed away, creating a wide circle of empty space around Nathan and the kneeling peacekeepers. "I think you've got the wrong person. I'm just trying to stay warm." "I'm nobody." The other peacekeepers had also dropped to their knees, their weapons holstered, their heads bowed in that same gesture of reverence. People in the crowd were stopping now, pulling out their own personal scanning devices, pointing them at Nathan. More alarms began to sound, a cascading wave of electronic shrieks spreading through the plaza, a human vagrant surrounded by kneeling Centauri officers, the most powerful law enforcement in the Empire, showing him the kind of deference reserved for royalty. Valoran slowly stood but kept his gaze lowered, as if afraid to meet Nathan's eyes directly. "Your DNA, Highness." The scanner detected the royal markers, the unbroken line. "You carry the genome of the lost dynasty, the sequence that has been missing for 1,000 years. It is you. It has always been you." "That's impossible," Nathan said, his mind racing through explanations and finding none that made sense. "I'm from Earth. I'm nobody special. My parents were teachers in Ohio. My father taught high school mathematics. My mother taught literature. They were good people, normal people. We lived in a small house with a yard. I had a dog named Max. There is nothing royal about me." Valoran touched a control on his wrist device, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. Nathan saw a complex double helix rotating slowly, sections of it highlighted in brilliant gold. The structure was beautiful in a way he could not quite articulate. Patterns within patterns, a kind of mathematical poetry encoded in the very building. Blocks of life. Next to it, another DNA sequence appeared, this one labeled in flowing Centauri script that its translation implant automatically converted to English. Royal Genome Archive, Dynasty Prime, final recorded sample 1043 years ago. The two sequences were identical in the marked regions, not similar, not close, identical down to the last base pair. "This must be a mistake," Nathan insisted, but his voice had grown quieter, less certain, some kind of genetic coincidence, convergent evolution, random chance. There has to be an explanation. Valoran shook his head slowly, and Nathan noticed that the peacekeeper's hands were trembling. The royal genome is not simply a bloodline, Highness, it is a design trait encoded by the founders themselves at the very beginning of our civilization. 12 unique genetic markers that cannot occur naturally, that have never appeared randomly in any species across any world we have encountered in 10,000 years of cataloging galactic biology until now. Until you, a crowd had gathered, hundreds of Centauri citizens forming a wide circle around the scene. Many were pulling out their own scanning devices, confirming what the peacekeepers had found. Nathan watched the readouts appear on personal communicators, saw the same golden highlights, the same impossible match. A wave of kneeling figures spread through the crowd like dominoes falling, each person sinking to their knees as their scanner confirmed the truth. Soon Nathan was standing in the center of a plaza filled with bowed heads, the only person still upright, besides Valoran, who seemed uncertain whether he was allowed to stand in the presence of. He kept saying that word, Highness. Nathan's legs felt weak. He reached out to steady himself against the wall, and Valoran moved instantly to support him, catching his arm with gentle firmness. This had to be some kind of elaborate scam, or maybe he had finally lost it, his mind breaking under the strain of homelessness and desperation, creating an elaborate hallucination to escape his miserable reality. But the scanners were real, the crowd was real, the fear and wonder in Valoran's eyes were absolutely real. And deep down, in a place Nathan rarely let himself acknowledge, he felt something stirring, a sense of recognition, as if some dormant part of himself was waking up after a very long sleep. We must escort you to the High Council immediately, Valoran said, his voice urgent but respectful. They will want to verify this, to understand, to know how this is possible. The Eternal Throne has been empty for so long, 1,000 years we have searched, 1,000 years we have waited, and now here you are. And if I refuse? Nathan asked, though he already knew the answer. He had nowhere to go, no resources, no way off this planet. Whatever was happening, he was caught in it now like a leaf in a river current. There was no going back to the heating vent, to the anonymous invisibility of homelessness. That life was over, ended the moment the scanner had screamed its recognition. Then I would beg you to reconsider, Highness. But I would not force you. I could not. The royal line commands. We do not command it. That is the first law of the Empire, the foundation of everything we are. You could walk away right now and we would have to let you go, but you wouldn't. Nathan said, not really. You would follow me, protect me, keep trying to convince me, because if I'm what you think I am, you can't just let me disappear. Valoran met his eyes for the first time, and Nathan saw the truth. There, you are correct, Highness. We cannot lose you again, not when we have only just found you. Within an hour, Nathan found himself in a transport skimmer flying over the city toward the Spire of Governance, the tallest structure on New Galatia. The skimmer was nothing like the cargo haulers and public transports he had ridden before. This was a vehicle meant for important people, with seats that adjusted to his body, climate control that responded to his comfort, and walls of transparent crystal that offered an unobstructed view of the city spreading out below. Valoran sat across from him, still, treating Nathan with a careful reverence that made him deeply uncomfortable. Peacekeeper had removed his helmet, revealing features that were striking, even by Centauri standards. High cheekbones, eyes that caught the light, like molten gold, skin that seemed to shift between shades of copper depending on the angle of the sun. Nathan wondered if all Centauri were this beautiful, or if Valoran was exceptional even among his own people. Can you explain this to me? Nathan asked, his voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the skimmer's engines. The Lost Dynasty. I've been living on your planet for 6 months and I never heard anything about it. I worked with Centauri, I ate in their restaurants, I slept in their doorways. No one ever mentioned a missing royal family. Valoran seemed surprised, his golden eyes widening slightly. You know nothing of our history? Nothing at all. I'm a maintenance tech. Was a maintenance tech. I fix air filters and calibrate recycling systems. I never studied Centauri history. Earth schools don't really teach much about alien civilizations. We're still too new to the galactic community, still catching up on 1,000 things we don't understand. Valoran was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Nathan watched the city slide past below, those gleaming towers and perfect streets, and wondered what secrets they held, what stories were embedded in their foundations. Then Valoran began to speak, his voice taking on the rhythm of a story told many times, passed down through generations like a sacred text. 1,000 years ago, he said, Centauri Empire was even greater than it is now. We controlled 60 star systems, and our technology allowed us to shape worlds, to move planets, to create life where none had existed before. We were masters of the galaxy in ways that even now we struggle to match. But we were not arrogant, not cruel. We were ruled by the dynasty, a royal family that had guided us since the founding, since the first Centauri looked up at the stars and dreamed of walking among them. Dynasty was different from other Centauri. They carried special gifts in their blood, gifts of insight and connection that allowed them to understand the needs of billions, to make decisions that would echo across centuries. When the Emperor spoke, it was as if he could hear the voice of the Empire itself, the collective wisdom of all our people distilled into guidance. What happened to them? Nathan asked, though he suspected the answer would not be comforting. The great silence. Valoran's voice dropped to almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly about this ancient tragedy might somehow make it happen again. No one knows exactly what occurred. In a single night, every member of the dynasty vanished. The Emperor, the Empress, their children, their cousins, their siblings, every individual who carried the royal genome. Gone without a trace. No bodies were found, no messages left behind, no signs of struggle or violence. They simply ceased to exist, as if they had been erased from reality itself. And you've been looking for them ever since? Valoran nodded, his expression distant with old grief. For 1,000 years, we have scanned every Centauri in the Empire, hoping to find some trace of the royal line, some lost branch of the family that might have survived the Great Silence. We have scanned billions of individuals across dozens of species, thinking perhaps the dynasty had fled to some remote colony, some hidden refuge We have searched archives and ancient data stores looking for clues. We have sent expeditions to the farthest reaches of known space. Nothing. Until today. Until a human from a planet we have only known for 50 years appears on our capital world carrying the unbroken royal genome, perfect and complete. Implication hit Nathan like a physical blow. You think my ancestors were part of your dynasty. You think somehow, impossibly, they ended up on Earth. I do not know what to think, Highness. It should be impossible. Humans and Centauri are not genetically compatible. We cannot interbreed. Our biology is fundamentally different, evolved on worlds separated by hundreds of light years, shaped by completely different environmental pressures. The chances of our DNA even being similar are astronomical, and yet the markers are there, perfect and complete, as if someone took the royal genome and carefully wove it into human DNA. Skimmer began its descent toward the spire of governance, a tower of blue crystal that seemed to drink in the light of New Galatia's sun and transform it into a soft inner glow. The structure was over a mile tall, rising from the heart of the city like a monument to Centauri achievement. Nathan had seen the building from a distance before, always wondering what it would be like inside. He never imagined he would enter it like this, as a confused vagrant who might somehow be royalty. The landing platform was crowded with officials, all of them wearing the elaborate robes of the High Council. The robes were works of art, each one unique, decorated with symbols and patterns that Nathan assumed held deep cultural significance. As Nathan stepped out of the skimmer, the entire assembly bowed in perfect synchronization, a wave of color and movement that took his breath away. An elderly Centauri female stepped forward, her skin a deep bronze color that spoke of advanced age and wisdom. She wore a circlet of silver on her head and carried a staff topped with a glowing crystal that pulsed with soft light. Her eyes, a pale gold that reminded Nathan of sunlight through honey, studied him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. I am First Counselor Serena, she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who looked so ancient. We have been waiting a very long time for this moment, longer than you can possibly imagine. Nathan felt like he should say something formal, something appropriate for the situation. Instead, he said, I still think this is a huge mistake. I'm just a guy who fixes air recyclers. I'm not special, I'm not royal, I'm just Nathan. A ghost of a smile touched Serena's lips, and Nathan thought he saw understanding in her eyes. Perhaps, but we must know for certain. The Empire has been incomplete for 1,000 years. If there is even a chance that you are the answer we have been seeking, we must investigate. Please follow me. They led Nathan through corridors of breathtaking beauty, past walls that showed holographic displays of distant worlds, through gardens where plants from 100 planets grew in careful harmony. The air smelled of flowers Nathan had no names for, and soft music played from sources he could not identify. Other Centauri stopped too, watch as they passed, words spreading through the spire like wildfire. The lost dynasty returns. The throne will be filled. The royal line endures. Nathan could hear the whispers following him, could feel the weight of 1,000 years of hope settling on his shoulders. Finally, they reached a circular chamber at the heart of the spire. In the center, of the room stood a crystalline pedestal, and floating above it, a sphere of pure light that pulsed with a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat, around the chamber. The entire High Council had gathered, 27 Centauri who governed the empire in the absence of the dynasty. Their faces showed a mixture of hope, skepticism, and fear. This is the archive of origins, Serena explained, gesturing to the floating sphere with obvious reverence. It contains the genetic records of every Centauri who has ever lived, going back 10,000 years to the founding itself. It also holds the complete genome of the dynasty, as designed by the founders before any member of the royal family was born. We will compare your DNA directly to the royal template. There can be no error, no misreading, no chance of contamination. The archive does not make mistakes. Nathan swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. And if it confirms what the scanners found, then we must discuss what that means for you and for the Empire. But let us not speculate until we know the truth. Serena gestured for Nathan to approach the pedestal. He walked forward slowly, very aware of the 27 pairs of eyes watching his every movement, judging him, wondering if he could possibly be real. When he reached the pedestal, a beam of soft blue light descended from the floating sphere, engulfing him in its glow. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant, a tingling warmth that seemed to reach into every cell of his body. Nathan felt as if he was being read every molecule of his being, catalogued and analyzed. The sphere began to pulse faster, its light growing brighter with each beat. Streams of data appeared in the air around Nathan, genetic sequences scrolling past too quickly for him to read. The chamber filled with a sound like crystalline chimes, growing in complexity and volume until it seemed to resonate in his bones. Then silence, complete and absolute. The light faded, the data streams vanished, the sphere returned to its gentle, steady pulse. Serena approached the pedestal and touched a panel that had emerged from its surface. Her hands shook as she read the results, her fingers tracing patterns on the display. When she looked up at Nathan, there were tears streaming down her face, cutting silver tracks through the bronze of her skin. The archive confirms it, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. 12 perfect matches, the royal genome unaltered, unbroken, preserved across 1,000 years, and the vast distance between our worlds. After all this time, after all our searching, the dynasty has returned. The chamber erupted in sound. Some of the counselors were weeping openly, their carefully maintained composure shattered by the weight of the moment. Others were embracing, holding each other as if they needed physical support to process what they had just learned. Several had fallen to their knees again, their heads bowed in prayer, or gratitude, or simple, overwhelming relief. Nathan stood frozen in the center of it all, unable to process what he was hearing, unable to accept that his life had just changed so completely and irrevocably. But I'm human, he said weakly, his voice almost lost it. The chaos, how is this possible? How can I carry Centauri royal DNA? Serena wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, composing herself with visible effort. That is the question we must answer. The archive can only tell us what is, not how it came to be. But there are theories we must explore, histories we must examine more carefully. The great silence took the dynasty from us, but perhaps somehow it also preserved Them, perhaps they did not vanish into death or oblivion. Perhaps they fled, seeking refuge in the one place we would never think to look, to Earth. Nathan asked, his mind reeling. 1,000 years ago, we barely had written language then, we were nowhere near space travel, we didn't even know other intelligent species existed. I know, Serena said, it makes no sense by any logic we understand, but the truth rarely does. In the beginning, we will search our records, we will search yours, we will find the connection, trace the thread that binds you to us across time and impossible distance. Younger counselor stepped forward, a male centauri with silver skin that seemed to glow in the chamber's soft light and sharp features that reminded Nathan of a bird of prey. His name, Nathan learned, was Torin, and unlike most of the others, he did not look happy. His expression was cold, calculating, suspicious. First counselor, Torin said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, we must be cautious here. We cannot simply accept this human as our rightful ruler, based solely on genetic evidence. However compelling it may appear, circumstances are beyond suspicious. Member of a primitive species appears on our capital world, destitute and desperate, carrying the royal genome. This could be an elaborate deception, a biological weapon designed to infiltrate our government, a trick played by enemies we have not yet identified. The archive cannot be deceived, Serena said firmly. You know this, counselor Torin. It is the most secure system we have, protected by technology even the founders barely understood. There is no way to falsify results from the archive. Perhaps the archive itself has been compromised, Torin countered, his eyes never leaving Nathan's face. It has been 1,000 years since the royal genome was last verified against a living subject. Who knows what might have changed in that time? Who knows what vulnerabilities might have developed? Nathan listened to the argument escalate, watched the council divide into factions before his eyes. Some supported immediate recognition of his claim, already planning coronation ceremonies and celebrations. Others demanded extensive testing and verification, wanting to be absolutely certain before making such a momentous decision. A few, like Torin, seemed to think the whole situation was a threat to be eliminated rather than a miracle to be celebrated. Enough, Serena's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, sharp and commanding. We will not make any permanent decisions today. The situation is too complex, the implications too vast. The human will be housed in the royal quarters while we investigate. He will be given access to our archives, our historians, our best genetic specialists. We will investigate this mystery thoroughly and carefully. But until we have proof of deception, proof that this is some kind of elaborate fraud, we will treat him with the respect due to his genetic heritage. She turned to Nathan, and her expression softened. What is your name? Your full name? Nathan Brooks. Just Nathan Brooks. Nathan Brooks, you are free to refuse what I am about to offer. You may leave this place, return to your life, and we will not stop you. We will even provide you with passage back to Earth if that is what you wish. But if you choose to stay, we will provide you with everything you need while we investigate this situation: food, shelter, education, medical care, resources. In return, we ask only for your cooperation, your honesty, and your Patience while we unravel this mystery. Nathan thought about his alternatives. Return to the freezing streets and the heating vent, try to beg for passage on another freighter, spend months working in exchange for transport back to Earth, where he had nothing waiting for him. Anyway, his parents were dead, killed in a transport accident 3 years ago. He had no siblings, no close friends, no place that felt like home. He had nothing to lose by staying in, potentially everything to gain, even if this was all somehow a mistake, some cosmic joke or bizarre coincidence. He would at least be warm and fed while they figured it out. I'll stay, he said. I'll help however I can. I want to know the truth as much as you do. The royal quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms that could have housed 100 people comfortably. Crystal walls looked out over the city, offering views that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. Holographic attendants appeared at his slightest gesture, offering food, entertainment, clothing, information, anything he might possibly need. A wardrobe had been prepared for him, filled with garments and styles he had never seen, fabrics that seemed to shift color with the light and adjust to his body temperature automatically. That first night, Nathan stood at the window, looking out at New Galatia's glittering skyline, trying to understand how his life had changed so completely in a single day. The city stretched to the horizon in every direction, millions of lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere down there was the heating vent he had called home, the corner where he had huddled against the cold. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been only hours. He was still Nathan Brooks, still the guy who had lost his job and ended up homeless on an alien world. But he was also, apparently, the genetic heir to an empire, carrier of a 1,000-year-old mystery that might reshape the relationship between humans and Centauri forever. A soft chime announced a visitor. Nathan turned to see Valoran entering the room, no longer in his peacekeeper uniform, but wearing formal robes of deep blue that brought out the golden tones in his skin. Highness, Valoran said, bowing, I have been assigned as your personal guard and advisor. If you have any questions, any needs, I am here to serve. Nathan gestured for Valoran to sit. The Centauri looked uncomfortable with the informal invitation, as if accepting it would violate some protocol, but eventually perched on the edge of a floating chair that adjusted to accommodate his larger frame. Tell me about the throne, Nathan said. What would it actually mean if this genetic thing is real? What would they expect me to do? Valoran considered the question carefully, his golden eyes distant with thought. The Emperor of the Centauri Empire is not simply political leader, he said finally. Position is, it is difficult to explain. In your language, the Emperor is the heart of our civilization. When the dynasty ruled, the Emperor could feel the empire, sense the needs of its people across vast distances. They made decisions that seemed to come from perfect intuition, but were actually based on a connection we do not fully understand. A connection encoded in their DNA, woven into their very being by the founders. So I would be expected to rule. Nathan's voice rose with panic. Make decisions for billions of people I don't know anything about. Your society, your laws, your culture. I can barely speak your language without a translator. How could I possibly rule an empire? No one expects you to assume the throne tomorrow, Valoran said gently. If your claim is validated, there would be years of education, of preparation. You would study our history, our laws, our customs. You would learn what it means to be Centauri, to understand the empire from the inside, and you would not rule alone. The council would guide you, the bureaucracy would handle the day-to-day governance. But your presence, your connection to the people, that is what has been missing. That is what we have lost. The dynasty did not rule through force or law. They ruled through love, through a bond with their people that transcended politics. Over the following weeks, Nathan's life became a blur of genetic tests, historical lessons, and diplomatic meetings. Teams of scientists analyzed his DNA from every possible angle, confirming and reconfirming the presence of the royal markers. They mapped his entire genome, compared it to databases of human genetic variations, searched for any sign of artificial modification or tampering. They found nothing suspicious, nothing that suggested his DNA had been engineered or altered. The royal markers were simply there, woven into his human genome as naturally as the genes for his brown eyes and dark hair. Historians searched ancient records for any mention of contact between the dynasty and Earth, any hint that the royal family might have known about humanity before the Great Silence. They combed through ship manifests, personal journals, diplomatic correspondence, scientific surveys. For weeks they found nothing. The search seemed hopeless, the connection between Nathan and the lost dynasty remaining an unexplainable mystery. And then one evening, Serena came to Nathan's quarters carrying a data tablet with an expression of stunned disbelief on her ancient face. She sat down heavily in one of the floating chairs, her aged hands trembling so badly that she nearly dropped the tablet. "We found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the deepest archives, records that have not been accessed in nearly 1,000 years. Files that were considered irrelevant. Footnotes to history, a ship manifest from the final days of the dynasty, just months before the Great Silence. Science vessel called the Wanderers. Dream, sent on a long-range exploration mission to catalog uncontacted star systems. It never returned. It was assumed lost, destroyed by some accident or anomaly. We mourned the crew and moved on." Nathan felt his heart racing, a sense of pieces falling into place. Where did it go? Serena activated the tablet, and a holographic star chart appeared in the air between them, expanding to fill half the room. Nathan saw the familiar spiral of the galaxy, star systems marked in different colors to indicate political boundaries and levels of exploration. A line traced the ship's planned route, jumping from system to system, moving farther and farther from Centauri space. With each jump, the line passed through uncharted territories, regions of space that even now remained largely unexplored, and then it ended at a small yellow star in an unremarkable sector, a star that Nathan recognized immediately. It went to Saul, Serena whispered, her voice full of wonder and fear. "To your son. To Earth. 1,000 years ago, when your world was primitive and ignorant of the wider galaxy, a Centauri ship carrying members of the royal family visited your planet, but that was 1,000 years ago," Nathan protested, even as his mind raced with implications. Earth had nothing then. We were just beginning to build our first cities. We had no technology, no space travel, no way to help or hide Anyone? Why would they go there? Perhaps that was precisely why they went there, Serena said. Perhaps they were hiding from something, or perhaps they knew something we did not saw. Something in humanity's future not. Imagine, the ship's manifest lists 37 crew members. 12 of them were members of the dynasty, distant relatives of the emperor, but all carrying the royal genome nonetheless. Scientists, explorers, dreamers seeking to expand our knowledge of the galaxy. Nathan stared at the star chart, at the line connecting his present to his impossible past. You think they stayed on Earth? You think they never came back? You think they had children with humans? It should not be possible, Serena said, and Nathan heard the struggle. Her voice, the clash between what she knew and what the evidence suggested. Centauri and humans are not genetically compatible. Our chromosomes are different. Our reproductive systems operate on completely different principles, but perhaps with their advanced knowledge they found a way, or perhaps something even stranger occurred. The royal genome was not natural, Nathan. It was engineered by the founders, beings whose technology we still do not fully understand even after 10,000 years of study. Perhaps those genes designed to persist and preserve found a way to integrate into human DNA. Perhaps they waited dormant through generations until the right combination of factors allowed them to express themselves fully. For what? Nathan asked. For 1,000 years they lay dormant in human bloodlines, waiting. For what? For this moment, Serena said simply. For the day when they would be found again. For the day when a human would come to New Galicia and the scanners would scream in recognition. The founders worked in time scales we can barely comprehend. Perhaps this was their plan all along. The revelation changed everything. What had seemed like an impossible coincidence now had an explanation, however strange and incomplete. The High Council held an emergency session, debating for 3 days straight about what to do with this information. Nathan attended the sessions, sitting in a gallery overlooking the council floor, listening to arguments in languages his translation implants struggled to convert into anything coherent. Some counselors believed the discovery of the Wanderer's dream proved Nathan's legitimacy beyond any doubt. Others, like Torin, argued that it proved nothing, that correlation was not causation, that a ship visiting Earth 1,000 years ago did not necessarily mean Nathan's DNA came from that crew. The debates grew heated, voices rising, old political rivalries resurfacing as different factions tried to claim Nathan for their own purposes. Some saw him as a tool to reform the empire, to change laws and customs they disagreed with. Others saw him as a threat, a disruptive element that would destabilize the careful balance of power the council had maintained for 1,000 years. Counselor Torin remained the most vocal opponent, and Nathan grudgingly had to admit the Centauri raised valid concerns. This proves nothing, Torin insisted during one particularly contentious session. So a ship went to Earth, so it carried members of the dynasty. That does not mean this human is their descendant. For all we know, the ship crashed upon arrival. The dynasty members died in the impact. Their DNA contaminated the local environment. This could still be an elaborate hoax, a human who was deliberately exposed to dynasty genetic material to create a false match. Then Test him, another counselor suggested. A female Centauri with copper skin and intelligent eyes. If he carries the royal genome, he should possess the royal gifts that come with it, the abilities that allowed the dynasty to rule. Put him to the trials, let him prove his worth the way every emperor before him had to prove theirs. Serena looked troubled, her bronze skin seeming to darken with concern. The trials have not been administered in 1,000 years. We do not even know if they still function properly. They were designed to test members of the dynasty Centauri who had been raised from birth to understand their heritage, asking a human to face them, a human who knew nothing of our ways until a few weeks ago. That seems cruel. What trials? Nathan asked from his seat in the gallery. The conversation paused, all 27 counselors turning to look up at him. He stood feeling self-conscious but determined to understand what they were discussing. What are you talking about? Torrance smiled coldly, and Nathan realized the counselor had been hoping for exactly this question. The founders built 3 trials to test the worthiness of the dynasty, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Tests of wisdom, compassion, and will. Every emperor had to pass them before assuming the throne. If you are truly of the royal line, you should be able to pass as well. The abilities are encoded in your DNA, waiting to be activated. And if I can't, Nathan asked, though he already suspected the answer, then we will know that the genetic match is meaningless. Torrance said with obvious satisfaction that you are simply a human with a fortunate mutation, an accident of biology with no real connection to the dynasty, that the royal line truly died with the great silence, and we have been chasing ghosts. Serena tried to object, rising from her seat with staff in hand. Nathan, you do not have to do this. Trials are dangerous. They were designed for Centauri, for individuals trained from childhood. Asking you to face them is unreasonable. But Nathan held up hand, silencing her protest. I'll do it. His voice was steady, more confident than he felt. I need to know as much as you do. If I'm supposed to be your emperor, then let's find out if I actually can be, and if I'm not, if this is all just some cosmic accident, then at least we'll know the truth. The trials were located beneath the spire of governance, in chambers that have been sealed for a millennium. As the council led Nathan down through ancient corridors, he could feel the weight of time pressing down on him. The walls here were older than the gleaming crystal above, made of some dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. These passages have been walked by emperors and empresses long dead, by the lost dynasty whose blood apparently ran in his veins. The first chamber contained a sphere of swirling light suspended in darkness. It hung in the center of a vast room, pulsing with colors Nathan had no names for. The air hummed with energy, and Nathan felt the hair on his arm standing up. Serena explained that this was the trial of wisdom. Nathan would be asked questions by the sphere, presented with problems that had no clear answer, dilemmas that had troubled the empire throughout its history. His responses would be judged not for correctness, because there were no correct answers, but for insight, for the ability to see beyond simple solutions, to understand the complexity of governing billions of diverse individuals across dozens of worlds. Nathan stepped into the chamber alone. The door sealed behind him with a sound like thunder leaving him in darkness. Except for the light of the sphere, he walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The sphere pulsed once, brilliant and blinding, and suddenly Nathan was somewhere else. He stood in a command center overlooking a dying planet. The world below was beautiful in its agony, continents wrapped in storms of toxic gas, oceans boiling away into space. Through the view screen he could see cities collapsing, millions of people fleeing. In doomed attempts to escape, a voice spoke in his mind, clear and terrible. "This world is dying," the voice said. "Natural processes are destroying it. A cascade of environmental failures that began centuries ago and cannot be stopped. You have the technology to save it, to halt the collapse and restore stability, but using that technology will fundamentally alter the planet's ecosystem. The world that emerges will be livable, but it will not be the world that existed before. Nothing will ever grow there naturally again. It will require constant maintenance, eternal intervention, or you can let it die. Preserve the memory of what it was. Allow the natural process to complete. Both choices carry immense cost. What do you choose?" Nathan thought about Earth, about the environmental disasters his own world had faced and continued to face, the debates about intervention versus preservation, about whether humanity had the right to reshape nature to suit its needs. He thought about the painful truth that sometimes there were no good choices, only different kinds of loss, and he answered, his voice steady. "In the darkness, I would save the people first," he said. "Evacuate everyone who can be evacuated, give them new homes, new lives. Then I would let the planet die, but I would record everything, every species, every ecosystem, every detail of how the world functioned. I would preserve it in archives and simulations, in genetic banks and environmental models. And perhaps centuries from now, when we understand more, when our technology is even more advanced, we could try to restore what was lost, but I would not force the survivors to live on a world that exists only through artificial support. They deserve a home that can sustain itself, even if that home is not the one they lost." The vision faded. Nathan found himself back in the chamber, the sphere pulsing gently before him. He did not know if he had passed or failed, but the sphere seemed satisfied, its light settling into a steady rhythm. The second chamber held the trial of compassion. Nathan entered to find himself standing in a vast network of light, thousands upon thousands of threads connecting him to points of awareness scattered across space. He realized with shock that he was connected to the minds of the Empire, feeling their emotions, their experiences, their lives. The pain came first, refugees fleeing wars he had never heard of, their terror and desperation flooding through him like physical blows, children dying of diseases that could be cured but weren't, because their worlds lacked resources, their small struggles ending in darkness. The grief of families torn apart, lovers separated, dreams destroyed by the casual cruelty of circumstance. But there was joy too, scientists celebrating discoveries that would change lives, their triumph and wonder bright as stars, families reuniting after years apart, love and relief washing over him in waves, children laughing, couples falling in love, artists creating beauty from nothing. The million small victories that made life worth living, the emotions threatened to overwhelm him, to drown him in the sheer weight of so much experience, so much feeling compressed into a single consciousness. Nathan felt himself fragmenting, losing track of where he ended and the empire began. But then he remembered being homeless, remembered the cold and the hunger and the desperate isolation of having nothing and being nothing. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look through you as if you did not exist. He understood suffering in a way that perhaps no Centauri could, because he had lived it so recently. The pain flowing through him was not abstract or distant. It was real and immediate and familiar. So Nathan held on. He let the pain flow through him without breaking, felt the joy without losing himself in it. He acknowledged each individual story, each life, while maintaining his own sense of self. He wept for the suffering and smiled at the happiness, and through it all he remained Nathan Brooks, changed but not destroyed by the weight of billions. The network released him slowly, the connections fading one by one until he stood alone again, gasping for breath, tears streaming down his face. But he was still standing, still himself. The trial was past. The third chamber was different from the first two. The trial of will required Nathan to face the darkest parts of himself, to confront the person he feared he might become if given absolute power. The moment he stepped through the door, visions assaulted him. He saw himself as a tyrant, using the empire's resources for personal gain, living in luxury while billions suffered. He saw himself making cruel decisions out of spite or pettiness, punishing those who disagreed with him, surrounding himself with sycophants who told him only what he wanted to hear. He saw the worst version of himself, drunk on power and blind to the suffering he caused. He saw himself as a weakling, unable to make hard decisions when they were needed most, letting the empire stagnate and decay rather than risk making mistakes. He saw himself paralyzed by doubt, second-guessing every choice until opportunities were lost and problems became catastrophes. He saw his compassion becoming weakness, his wisdom becoming cowardice, and he saw himself as an imposter, forever pretending to be something he was not, playing at being emperor while knowing deep down that he was just Nathan Brooks, maintenance tech from Ohio, who had no business ruling in empire. He saw himself living in constant fear of being exposed, of the moment when everyone would realize he was a fraud. The visions pressed down on him, demanding that he choose which one was the truth, which one represented his real nature. The trial wanted certainty, wanted him to declare absolute knowledge of who he was and what he would become. But Nathan looked at each vision and said no, not to the power, not to the fear, but to the idea that any one of these extremes defined him. He was neither saint nor monster, neither weakling nor tyrant. He was human, flawed and limited and capable of both great kindness and great cruelty. The trial demanded absolute certainty, unshakable will. Instead, Nathan offered something different. He offered self-awareness, the knowledge of his own limitations. He offered humility, the understanding that he would make mistakes and need to learn from them. He offered doubt, not as a weakness but as a tool, a reminder to question himself, to seek advice, to remain open to being wrong. I don't know what kind of emperor I would be, Nathan said to the darkness. I don't know if I would be good or bad, wise or foolish. I only know that I would try, I would do my best, I would listen to advisors, I would care about the people I served. And when I made mistakes, because I would definitely make mistakes, I would try to fix them. That's all I can promise, that's all anyone can promise. For a long moment, nothing happened. The visions continued to press against him, demanding more certainty, more confidence, more absolute knowledge. Then the chamber filled with light, brilliant and warm, and a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere spoke a single word. Recognized, the trial accepted him. Not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. Not because he had unshakable will, but because he understood the limits of will, the importance of flexibility and self-doubt. Nathan emerged from the trials exhausted, his mind reeling from what he had experienced, his body trembling with fatigue. The council waited outside in the ancient corridor, and when they saw him walking on his own power, saw the light of the trial still fading from his eyes like after images, they knew. Counselor Torrens stepped forward slowly. The silver-skinned Centauri looked different somehow, his expression no longer cold and suspicious, but thoughtful, almost sad. For the first time since Nathan had met him, Torrens smiled. It was a small smile, full of resignation and perhaps a touch of relief. You passed, Torrens said quietly. Against all reason, against all probability, you passed all 3 trials. I have studied the histories, Nathan Brooks. I know that dozens of members of the dynasty failed these trials over the centuries. Individuals born into the royal family, raised from childhood to understand their heritage, trained in wisdom and compassion and will, they failed. And you, a human who knew nothing of us until weeks ago, you succeeded. I have fought against accepting you because I feared change. I feared what it would mean for our empire to be ruled by someone so different from ourselves. But the trials do not lie. They cannot be deceived or fooled. If you can pass what defeated so many of our own people, then perhaps the founders knew what they were doing when they sent the dynasty to your world. Torrens knelt, and the rest of the council followed his lead. Even Serena, who had supported Nathan from the beginning, dropped to one knee with tears streaming down her bronze face. Hail the Emperor. Returned, Torrens said, his voice ringing through the ancient corridor. Hail the bridge between worlds. Hail Nathan Brooks, the lost dynasty found. Coronation took 6 months to prepare. Representatives from all 47 star systems of the Empire arrived on New Galatia, bringing gifts and pledges of loyalty. The city transformed itself, every street decorated with banners and lights, every building hosting celebrations. It was the greatest gathering the Centauri had held in 1,000 years, and the joy was palpable, infectious, spreading through the population like wildfire. Nathan spent those months learning everything he could about the empire he would soon rule, the history spanning 10,000 years. From the founding to the present, the culture with its complex web of customs and traditions, the politics, the delicate balance of power between the council, the planetary governments, and the emperor, the economy, the military, the justice system, the educational institutions. There was so much to learn that Nathan's head spun with information overload, but he also insisted on something unprecedented. He brought Earth into the conversation, contacted humanity's government, explained what had been discovered, the revelation that humans and Centauri shared genetic heritage, however impossibly, changed the relationship between the two species. Overnight, what had been a distant diplomatic connection became something deeper, more personal. Earth was no longer just another primitive world on the edge of Centauri space. It was the place where the dynasty had taken refuge, where the royal line had been preserved through 1,000 years of human history. Human scientists worked with Centauri geneticists to unravel the mystery of how the royal genome had persisted through 1,000 years of human reproduction. What they discovered amazed both species. The royal markers were not just genetic code in the traditional sense. They were something more sophisticated, something that operated on principles of biology neither species fully understood. They could lie dormant for generations, hidden among normal human genes, waiting for the right combination of factors to express themselves fully. It was as if the founders had designed them to be patient, to survive, to outlast the empire itself if necessary. Nathan's family tree was traced back as far as historical records allowed. His great-great-great-grandmother, they eventually discovered, had been a woman named Sarah Brooks who lived in Ohio in the early 21st century. She had been a teacher, married to a carpenter, lived an ordinary life by all accounts. The trail went cold before her, lost in the chaos of earlier centuries when record-keeping was less reliable. But somewhere in her ancestry, impossibly far back, was a connection to the crew of the Wanderer's Dream. Perhaps one of the dynasty members had married a human. Perhaps they had deliberately introduced their genetic material into the human population. Perhaps it had been an accident, a consequence of living among humans for years or decades. The truth was lost to time, buried too deep to recover, but the result was undeniable. Nathan Brooks carried the royal genome, and through him the lost dynasty had returned. On the day of the coronation, Nathan stood in the Hall of Emperors, vast chamber at the top of the spire of governance. The hall was a marvel of architecture, its walls made of crystal that showed views of all 47 star systems of the empire. Above, a dome showed the night sky as it appeared from each Centauri world simultaneously, an impossible merging of perspectives that made Nathan dizzy when he looked up. Eternal Throne waited at the far end of the hall, raised on a platform of dark stone. It was not ornate or jeweled like Nathan had expected. It was simple, almost austere, a chair carved from a single piece of black rock that seemed to absorb light. Symbols covered its surface, writing in a language so old that even the Centauri could no longer read it. The founders had made this throne, and it had been waiting 1,000 years for someone worthy to sit upon it. The hall was filled with thousands of witnesses, Centauri, nobility in their finest robes, human diplomats wearing formal attire that looked strangely out of place among all the alien finery, representatives from dozens of species that had treaties with the empire, beings of shapes and forms so varied that Nathan struggled to count them all. Valoran stood nearby in full ceremonial armor, having been promoted to head of the Imperial Guard, his copper skin polished until it shone. Serena approached Nathan carrying the crown of the dynasty. The crown was breathtaking, a circlet of crystalline metal that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its structure. Stars moved through it, nebulae swirled, whole Solar systems rose and fell as the crown caught the light. This artifact had been recovered from the sealed royal chambers, and not worn in a millennium. Just looking at it made Nathan's breath catch. Nathan Brooks, Serena said, her voice carrying through the hall without need for amplification. The architecture itself seemed to be amplifying her words, letting every witness hear. Clearly, you have been tested, you have been judged, you have been found worthy by the standards of the founders themselves. Do you accept the burden and the blessing of the eternal throne? Do you swear to serve the empire and its people with wisdom, compassion, and will? Do you pledge to be the bridge between worlds, the connection between Centauri and human, the living embodiment of our shared heritage? Nathan thought about the homeless man he had been just months ago, huddled against a heating vent in the cold, invisible to the thousands passing by. He thought about the impossible chain of events that had led him here, from that frozen plaza to this magnificent hall. He thought about the responsibility he was about to accept, the weight of billions of lives that would rest on his decisions, the legacy of 1,000 years that he would have to uphold. And he thought about the lesson he had learned in the trial of will, that he did not need to be perfect. He only needed to be honest, to try his best to remain aware of his own limitations while still moving forward. The dynasty had not been perfect either. They had made mistakes, faced challenges, struggled with doubt, but they had tried, and that was all anyone could ask. I do, Nathan said, his voice steady and clear. Serena placed the crown on his head. The moment the crystalline metal touched his skin, something changed. The crown flared with inner light, brilliant and warm, and Nathan felt a sensation like electricity racing through his body, igniting nerves he had not known existed. The royal genome, dormant all his life, suddenly activated fully, completely. For the first time, Nathan gasped as his awareness expanded outward like ripples on a pond. He felt the empire spreading out around him like a living thing, a vast organism of which he was now the heart. Billions of minds, each one a small light in an endless network. He could sense their hopes and fears, their joys and sorrows, not in invasive detail, but as a general awareness of the empire's emotional state. It was like the trial of compassion, but softer, more gentle, a constant background hum of connection. He felt New Galatia beneath him, millions of Centauri celebrating in the streets. He felt the other worlds of the empire, distant but present, their populations watching the coronation through broadcasts and feeling their own joy at the return of the dynasty. He felt Earth too tiny and far away, but shining bright with human excitement. His birth world connecting to his new home through the bridge of his own existence. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Nathan understood now why the dynasty had been special, why the empire had needed them. This connection allowed him to sense problems before they became crises, to understand needs before they were articulated, to make decisions informed by the collective experience of billions. It was not mind reading or telepathy. It was something subtler and perhaps more powerful, an intuition so deep it seemed like magic. All hail Emperor Nathan I, Serena proclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. All hail the lost dynasty returned. All hail the bridge between stars, the son of two worlds, the To 10,000 years of history, the hall erupted in sound, cheers and applause, and the musical calls of alien species filled the air. Nathan walked slowly toward the throne, feeling the weight of the crown and the weight of history pressing down on him. Every step echoed through the hall, magnified by the architecture until it sounded like the footsteps of giants. When he reached the throne, he paused, looking at it. Black stone seemed to pulse with its own light now, as if recognizing him, welcoming him home. Nathan reached out and touched its surface. The stone was warm, almost alive, and he felt something pass between them, a transfer of knowledge, of history, of all the emperors and empresses who had sat here before him. Then he sat down. The throne recognized him instantly. Light flared from the ancient stone, brilliant white, shot through with gold, racing out through the hall like lightning. It spread through the spire, through the city, across New Galicia like dawn. Breaking, the light reached into space, touching the orbital stations and the ships in dock, racing out through the Empire at speeds that defied physics. Every Centauri in the Empire felt it, a pulse of connection that told them their Emperor had returned. On 47 worlds, across dozens of light years, billions of people stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky, feeling the touch of something they had thought lost forever. Nathan sat on the throne and felt the Empire settle around him like a vast cloak. He was still Nathan Brooks, still the maintenance tech from Ohio who had gotten stranded on an alien world. But he was also something more now. He was the bridge between humanity and the Centauri, the living proof that sometimes the most impossible things could be true, that the universe had a sense of timing and purpose even when events seemed random and cruel. In the months and years that followed, Nathan learned to use the abilities his genetic heritage had given him. The connection to the Empire was not constant or overwhelming. It ebbed and flowed like a tide, sometimes clear and strong, sometimes barely perceptible. He learned to listen to it, to trust the intuition it provided while still relying on logic and counsel from his advisors. He made mistakes, plenty of them. There were diplomatic incidents and policy failures, decisions that seemed wise at the time but proved flawed in execution. But the council was patient. Surprisingly so. They had waited 1,000 years for the dynasty to return. They could wait for their new emperor to grow into his role, to learn from his errors, to slowly become the ruler they needed. Nathan also changed the Empire in ways the Centauri had not anticipated. He opened formal relations with Earth, not as patron to client but as partners, bringing humanity into the galactic community as full equals rather than distant observers. He used his position to advocate for the forgotten people of the Empire, the ones who lived in the shadows like he once had. He knew their struggles intimately, understood what it meant to be invisible, and he was determined that no one in his empire would suffer as he had suffered. He reformed laws that had become outdated, questioned traditions that no longer served their purpose. He created new departments focused on poverty relief, housing assistance, job training for displaced workers. Some Centauri grumbled about a human changing their ancient ways, about an outsider disrupting traditions that had endured for millennia, but most recognized that this was exactly what the Empire needed. New blood, new perspectives, new ideas. The dynasty had always been different. from ordinary Centauri had always seen the world from unique angles. Perhaps having a human emperor was simply the next step in that long tradition of being extraordinary. 1 year after his coronation, Nathan stood in the plaza where he had been discovered, where Valoran's scanner had first detected the royal genome. The heating vent was still there, still pumping warm air into the cold street. Nathan had requested that it be marked with a memorial plaque, simple brass plate embedded in the pavement. The plaque read, "Here Emperor Nathan I was found," proof that worth can be hidden in unexpected places, that royalty is not determined by birth alone but by the content of character. Remember always to look closely at those you pass by, for you never know who they might become. Not to honor himself, but to remember all the people who had been invisible, all the ones who slipped through the cracks of even the most advanced civilizations. It was a reminder to his empire, to himself, to never forget where he had come from. Valoran stood beside him, no longer surprised when Nathan did things like this. In the years since the coronation, the former peacekeeper had become Nathan's closest friend and most trusted advisor. He understood the emperor in ways few Centauri could, having been there from the very beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Valoran asked quietly, his golden eyes reflecting the light from the memorial plaque. "Staying that day instead of walking away. You could have refused, could have gone back to Earth, built a quiet life somewhere." Nathan considered the question honestly, as he considered all of Valoran's questions. The Centauri had a gift for asking the things Nathan needed to think about. His life was no longer simple. He carried responsibilities that sometimes kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his royal chambers while his mind raced through problems and solutions. He made decisions that affected billions of people, choices that would echo across centuries. The weight of the crown was more than metaphorical. He could feel it, even when he was not wearing it, a constant pressure of duty and expectation. He could never go back to being just Nathan Brooks, maintenance tech. That person had died the moment the scanners had screamed, replaced by Emperor Nathan I. Sometimes he missed the simplicity of his old life, the freedom of having no one depend on him, no empire weighing on his shoulders, but he could use his position to help people now, to make things better in ways he never could have imagined before, to bridge the gap between species and cultures, to prove that sometimes the universe had a plan, even when everything seemed random and cruel. Every law he reformed helped thousands or millions. Every program he funded saved lives. Every tradition he questioned opened doors for people who had been excluded. "No," Nathan said, finally, his voice firm with certainty. "I don't regret it. This is where I'm supposed to be. I don't know if I believe in destiny or fate, but I believe in purpose, and this, all of this, feels right in a way nothing else in my life ever has." He looked up at the spire of governance, at the throne waiting for him in its heights. A year ago he had been nobody, nothing, forgotten human on an alien world. Now he was the emperor of 47 star systems. The lost dynasty returned, the bridge between Earth and the stars, and somehow, impossibly, wonderfully, it felt right, like coming home after a long journey, like finding something he had not known he was searching for. The empire had waited 1,000 years for its emperor to come home. Nathan Brooks. Former homeless man, former maintenance tech, former nobody had finally arrived, and he would spend the rest of his life proving that sometimes the best rulers come from the most unexpected places, that greatness can be found in the most humble circumstances. The throne was no longer empty. The lost dynasty had been found, and the Centauri empire, ancient and proud and set in its ways, would learn what it meant to be ruled by someone who remembered what it felt like to have nothing, who understood the value of kindness, who knew that true strength came not from power but from compassion. Nathan the First, the humans called him with pride. Nathan the Bridge, the Centauri said with hope. Nathan the Found. Historians would write in the years to come, but in his heart, in the quiet moments when he was alone, he was still just Nathan Brooks, still trying his best, still making it up as he went along, still hoping that would be enough, and for the people of the empire, for the billions of lives that depended on him, for the future he was helping to build, one decision at a time. It was more than enough. It was exactly what they needed. The scanner had found royal DNA in a homeless human, and in doing so had changed the course of galactic history. The throne had been empty for 1,000 years, but now it was filled again. The lost dynasty had returned, not in the form anyone expected, but in exactly the form the universe had intended all along, and that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments. Whether positive or negative, your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.